Hello viewers, it's Howard Smith, and on this episode of BRM TV, I install the all-new and ingenious working point rodding from DCCconcepts to our Art of Compromise project layout. Phil Parker assembles a telephone kiosk great for post-80s layouts, but first, now running in its 1950s guise, it's our layout from this issue of the magazine, Little Bytham.
Welcome once more to Little Bytham, and may I please thank all of you who have commented so favourably on the DVD that was produced and was provided with the November issue of BRM last year. Now we're back to Little Bytham, but in this presentation it's in 1958 mode, the period that I remember best as a train spotter. As you can see, or you'll certainly see on the DVD, it's quite a large layout and it's a team effort. Now, members of the team who've contributed to it will be credited during the presentation, but there are several others as well, far too numerous to mention, but I'm immensely privileged that so many people have contributed. And if you look closely later on, during the session on the Midland and Great Northern, there are some signals produced by my friend Tony G, yet another person who contributed to the project. It is long term. It's been a decade in the making of this, and it's almost complete. However, my making of the locos and rolling stock has taken me over 40 years, so it can't possibly be a short-term project. But it is, I hope, inspirational and also aspirational. The train with the longest pedigree on the East Coast Main Line was, of course, the Flying Scotsman. It first really got the name in 1888, and it's still in use today. In 1958, it was made up mainly of Mark I cars, and astonishingly was a New England diagram going north. Seen here, behind 60506, Wolf of Badenoch. One of the most prestigious trains on the East Coast Main Line in 1958 was the Queen of Scots Pullman between King's Cross and Glasgow via Leeds. Here it is heading north in all its finery behind an A1. And a V2 goes by at a steady pace, this one weathered by Tom Foster. Speaking of pace, high pace, there's no other place in the realm where so many 100-mile-an-hour runnings have taken place than Little Bytham. Just look at the works of Knock, Ransom Wallace and Allen. See in their logs, Little Bytham is mentioned time after time. I'd like to thank at this point Jesse Sim, who's visible in this picture. He helped me make the DVD by running trains. A lot of people have been involved with the building of Little Bytham, and you can see the results here. Buildings by Ian Wilson and by Bob Dawson. Track work by Norman Solomon. I made most of the locomotives and, for the record, most of the passenger carrying stock. I'll only mention the locomotives made by other people as we go through this presentation. With all the names being mentioned, please don't get the impression that Little Bytham is the product of checkbook modelling. It most certainly isn't. Most of it's been arrived at by that wonderful English custom of barter. I've made locos, I've repaired locos, I've painted back scenes, I've taken pictures, and I've made videos, all in exchange. Though not the most common of types, B16s could be seen south of Grantham on the odd occasion, such as here. This loco, built by Tony Geary, heads a train made by Rob Kinsey. Notice the lamps. Nothing runs on Little Bytham without the correct lamps, front and rear. The non-stop, the Elizabethan, in this case Edinburgh to King's Cross, behind a Haymarket A4, 60024 Kingfisher. I wrote about this train when I made it, 25 years ago. It appeared in BRM then. An A3 races south on an up express. Alan Hammett built this locomotive and Tony Geary made most of the train, with just a few bits and pieces in it made by me and John Holden. The fast Newcastle King's Cross Express is seen here headed by a Gateshead Pacific 60155 Borderer. Note in its consist the triplet set, originally made for the 1935 Silver Jubilee. It's passed by a V2 heading north on yet another fully fitted express freight. This was a feature of this line, long distance, long, fast freights, often hauled by Gresley's 262s. An A2 heads north on a King's Cross Edinburgh-Glasgow Express, complete with full kitchen car. As with many of the locomotives I've made, this one has been painted by Ian Rathbone. Perfectly. One of the things I'm zealous about with any model railway I've been involved with is good running. If all the basic first principles are followed, good baseboards, good track, consistent locos, stock, compatibility, simple, robust electrics, no DCC for me I'm afraid, then you can get excellent running, as I hope this DVD shows. Not all the trains running through Little Bytham in 1958 were long distance nor fast. Here's a sort of short distance, probably Peterborough to Grantham, hauled by an 022. It's passed by an A4 in the form of 60002 Sir Murrah Wilson on the down Tees-Tyne Pullman. The 022 and the Pullman cars were weathered for me by Tim Shackleton. York Shed had not a lot of top-link duty, but here we see one of its A1s racing south on a York King's Cross Express. In this case, the loco was painted for me by Jeff Haynes. Peterborough's Pacifics tended to be on more mundane duties than, say, Top Shed or Grantham or Gateshead, and here is an A23 on a typical parcels working. It's passed by a 9F heading south on full minerals, originating from the Nottinghamshire pits. The loco, the 9F, was built by my eldest son Tom when he was a mere 15 years old. The scenic work really is the work of several of us, including myself, Richard Wilson and Gilbert Barnett, so thanks to them for all their inputs in that respect. An A1 takes the Northumbrian northwards. In this consist there's another triplet set, in this case the X1938 triplet from the Flying Scotsman, now fitted with a standing bar. I've lost count of the number of V2s I've built, but they were very common on the East Coast Main Line, so have to be included. Here's an old Newcastle one, taking a summer Saturday extra northwards. I don't have many RTR locos on Little Bytham, just the occasional one, or two, as in this case a modified Bachmann Line F. It's heading the Cliff Uddingston cement block train. The train itself built by Rob Kinsey. It's passed by an A1 on the Up West Riding. The A1 was built by Tony Geary. The train, mine. Though the carriage of coal made a lot of money for the railways, the empties had to be returned to their pits. In this case, hauled by an Austerity 280, a DJH kit. The wagons have been weathered perfectly by Rob Davey. A fast one-stop service to Edinburgh was the Talisman, here hauled by yet another A4 in the form of 60034 Lord Farringdon. The train is modified Bachmann Mark Is. Just for a change, a very short train. Note the tractors from the Alice Chalmers factory at Essendine. When the prototype Deltic came to the East Coast Main Line in 1958, one of its duties was the down White Rose as far as Doncaster. And here it is. Once again the West Riding. From Leeds Central, picking up bits at Wakefield from Bradford to King's Cross. A1, as usually, hauled. Notice the articulated twins in this train, survivors from the pre-war train, the streamliner of the same name. A K3, again built by Alan Hammett, departs from the Upslow across to the Upfast, on an all-stations parliamentary. More Arctic twins, this time built by Tony Geary from Southern Pride Components. An A23 passes with an Up Newcastle Express, including a different type this time of triplet, one of the 1924 ordinary ones. I'd never tried to make a DMU, and even if I did, it wouldn't be as good as this. A modified Bachmann Cravens unit enters from the south. It's passed by the Teestime Pullman, already described. Those with the knowledge will know that this Pullman train is slightly anachronistic. The Mark I cars didn't appear until a year after Little Bytham station was closed and demolished, but they are rather nice. With the Pullman safely out of the way, the DMU gets the road from the slow to the fast, heading north. The A1s had many of the Pullmans, in this case the Yorkshire Pullman hauled by Bongras. The train came from Harrogate, Leeds, Bradford, York and Hull, and was made up at Doncaster. In 1958, the Midland and Great Northern was still operating, and here we have a B12 on the Leicester. The bridge here is really no more than a sort of mock-up representation. Thanks to Jamie Guest, I've now got all the etches to produce an accurate model of this bridge. On summer Saturdays, many excursion trains were run from the East Midlands cities to the Norfolk coast, in this case behind one of Ivart's flying pigs. I don't know how many people have been involved with the building of this, but several have already died. I completed it, and I've survived. On weekdays, apart from the Leicester, most of the passenger trains were very short on the Midland and Great Northern, such as this, a Nottingham Lynn 3-car set, hauled by a modified Bachmann 4F. Another heavy full coal train heads south, heading for New England Yard for redistribution behind a modified Hellion 023. The 3 set, passing above behind a southeastern Finecast 4F, was built by that great coach modeller Larry Goddard many years ago. Not long ago, I received them very much second-hand, and fortunately I was able to repair them and patch paint them. One of Grantham's A5s passes on an all-stations Grantham-Peterborough stopper. It's passed by an A4 on the up afternoon and very fast talisman. The signals are the work of Graham Nicholas and Mick Nicholson, and they are absolutely wonderful. They complement the Norman Solomon trackwork perfectly. I'm very fortunate to have such skilled individuals in the team which built Little Bytham. I think part of the excitement of running Little Bytham is seeing long-distance, long, fast trains passing each other. In this case, a York Express heading for King's Cross, and going north, the Scotch goods. Please note the weathering. Nothing runs on Little Bytham without having been weathered. Coach sides might be shiny, but roofs, ends and bogies underframes have all been weathered. Nothing to me looks less realistic than shiny, gleaming, out-of-the-shops products. Though not very common, I'm sure the occasional L1 would pass through Little Bytham, in this case on a stopping train. The loco is modified Hornby, and the carriages from a variety of different kits. Not much RTR on here. Though I mentioned I've only got 1 or 2 RTR locomotives, actually about 6 or 7 are featured here. If nothing else, it shows how good modern proprietary locomotives are. However, my preference will always be get building. We see the Cliff Uddingston cement block train once more. And please note the point rodding. This is one of the last jobs I've got to do on Little Bytham, and it's taking me ages. But it has to be done. A B1 enters the station on a Nottingham King's Cross train and stops. It's accompanied by a northbound stopping train, in this case hauled by a J6. Ian Wilson started this loco and I completed it for him. The J6 gets underway, and it's passed by an A2, one of York's A2s with double chimney and multiple valve regulator. Another V2, this time heading north on a down express, and it's passed by an A3 on an up express. Very common, expresses passing each other at Little Bytham. Some of the V2s I've made have been via Graham King's resin body on a Comet chassis. And here's one heading north, passing a DJH 9F. And yet another Graham King V2, in this case in BR black. Note the pair of vans on the rear of this fish train. These were known as swingers and were added at intermediate stations to stop the time lost in splitting the train. It was, of course, fully fitted. Rob Davey made and weathered the complete train. One thing which disappeared from our home railways, getting on for 50, maybe 60 years ago now, was the pickup freight. It was very time intensive and to some extent labour intensive. If you look at this sequence, the loco arrives with its train. Sorry about the wobbly wagon. Note the cleaning pad on this brake van. Several brake vans are fitted with these. They're available from Gagemaster. They're just a felt pad, nothing is put on them, but it takes the dust off the track and keeps it clean. Coupling and uncoupling is achieved by the use of Spratt and Winkle couplings, activated by magnets laid in the ballast. The system works really well. And conducts a whole series of manoeuvres across the slips and diamonds to get from the downside to the upside. All of this is achieved very, very well because the locomotive, built by Alan Hammett, and the trackwork by Norman Solomon are perfectly compatible. The working ground signals were made by my friend Roy Vinter, a one-time fireman at Grantham. That sound, by the way, is that of a real train, just about 50 feet away. The pickup was probably the least important train in the whole day, so it would stand in the lay-by until other trains went past. Even a humble, unfitted freight, the like of which behind this 022. And it would certainly wait for a parcels train or empty stock train, in this case hauled by a K3. It's 1 out of 10 at any one time in BR days, fitted with a Great Northern tender. The pickup departs. Its next stop, Corby Glen, where the process will be repeated. The singular W1, 464, or 4622 for the pedants. 60700 heads north on a down express. Little Bytham, the station and its environment, was demolished after closure in the summer of 1959. Almost nothing now remains. The Willoughby is still there, of course, and the booking office, and the station master's house. But now it's just 4 tracks, electrified. And just to finish, both the train sets in operation. The 02 on the heavy, full goods heading south, the B12 on the Leicester, the time period on the M&GN, I must admit, is very flexible. 10 years since nationalisation and its closure in 1959. And an A22 on a York Express. So thank you ever so much for watching, and may I please thank the Warner's DVD folk, particularly Kyle and Susanna, who've put this together so beautifully. Thank you. Okay, well, studio time, and this time I'm joined with Richard Brighton from DCCconcepts. Hi, pleasure to meet you again. Now, a few of you will have heard, no doubt, in the pages of BRM that recently some people at DCCconcepts have been really busy behind the scenes developing what has to be a first for model railways, and that is working point rodding. I mean, it's incredible to believe that this is actually being done. So, Richard, how did it all come about?
Well, there's been lots of examples of decorative point rodding or scenic point rodding around for a long time, and there's been lots of examples of people making very, very fiddly frets of point cranks but don't actually operate. And we thought it's about time that we took the plunge and did something brave. And this is really brave.
It is brave. I mean, but such an incredible range from the outset. I mean, talk us through some of the packs we can see here in front on display. So I believe this is your starter pack, is it?
That's right. This is the main starter pack, and this has everything you need to get started with working point rodding.
Right.
So you have some 250mm lengths of square stainless steel point rodding in here. You've also got some stools to thread them through. You've also got different types of cranks, so short, medium and long cranks, and you've got some compensators in there as well.
So it's pretty much everything you need from the outset for the
that's
average
right.
layout. But let's say, okay, I've bought the average pack, but I want to expand. Can I expand with just a few components, or do I need to buy another pack to add on?
No, no. The beauty of this system is that although the starter pack has everything you need to get started, each of the individual components of the starter pack are all available separately. So the individual packs that we have here, you can see, we have the stools available, the pins.
So
here.
just talk us through the stools. So these are injection moulded plastic, I believe.
They are indeed.
But the detail on them really is incredible. I mean, if we just pick up this one item here, I'm not sure how easily this is to see on camera, but it's really, really fine. You've even got the holes there for the rodding to be threaded through in the square format. Very nicely modelled.
They are very precise. They're beautiful to work with as well. They're on the concrete plinth, as you can see there, so you can put that down. It's easier, we find, to thread the rodding through the stools before you fix them down to the layout.
Okay.
It just makes life easier when you're installing it. But fantastic little bits of kit, those.
Yeah. So that is the stools there, and then of course you've got, I mean, I love these. These are the compensating cranks. So
that's right.
do you mind if we just take one of these out of the pack?
So the thing with the compensators is, of course, on real prototypical point rodding, you wouldn't have huge long runs of rodding without a compensator in, because the weather would make it expand and contract and you wouldn't get precise operation. So people have asked us, how do you connect two pieces of rodding together?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is with a compensator.
Okay.
That's how you to connect two pieces together.
When I pull or push on this end here, it does the opposite on the other end there, just as it would do in real life. Very nicely done. So, etched base.
That's right.
All of your pins are gold plated.
That's right. This is brass.
This is brass.
You can see how easily that moves in there. So that's actually a hand-turned rivet that goes all the way through the middle of that. It's incredibly difficult to produce.
How do you recommend fixing the rodding at the ends there?
Well, this is a crimp pocket. So when you get your rodding, you can put it into the crimp pocket and then just squeeze it closed. If you want some extra rigidity on that joint, you can solder it or you can super glue it as well.
Everything you need there from the outset. You don't need that much in terms of tools just to close that up. What, just a pair of pliers or something just to give it a good squeeze?
Right, yes. It's the sort of thing that everybody can put on their layout, which is something that DCCconcepts, of course, is famous for, is taking things which people perceive as being complex and difficult and making them incredibly easy to do.
Oh yeah.
So
okay, so this is the cranks. We've talked about some of the rodding. We haven't really talked about the pins.
That's right.
Now, how do you recommend fixing everything down to the layout? Because this has obviously got to move and it's got to be functional and quite sturdy. So
that's right,
so there's no place. So how do you recommend doing that?
We do have a little sample here. I don't know if the camera can pick this up. But you can see a crank here that's held down by 4 pins onto the baseboard.
Right.
Everything you need to fix the cranks to the baseboard is, of course, included in the kit. But what you need to do basically is drill some pilot holes for those pins. You also then make a little indentation in the centre where that rivet is going to go.
Right.
And then you put the crank on and put the 4 pins into place, and that holds it extremely robustly onto the baseboard. That's not going to move anywhere at all.
A very, very smart job indeed. Well, we've talked about it. I think it's time we see this in action on the camera. So, Richard, fire away.
No problem at all. You can see what we've got here is we're using our very small Cobalt SS point motor to drive the rodding to change the point.
Yeah.
Of course, if you don't want to use a surface mount point motor, you can, of course, use an underboard point motor and have the point blade change the rodding back to the box as well. So it can operate in either direction.
Okay.
The SS point motor we have here is either digital or analog, so it doesn't matter how you model. It's open to everybody.
And it's also a slow action machine, so just watch how smoothly this operates as we switch the blade.
So that should now actuate. And back.
Very, very
So
smooth.
you can see all the rodding moving through the stools there.
Yeah.
You can see the crank changing, and you can see a full throw of the point on there as well.
It's really, really nicely done.
You're not really limited if you use the underboard motors to drive the rodding, of course.
Yeah.
And you could have a prototypical signal box with many pieces of rodding going into it. Alternatively, you could use a few of the surface-mounted point motors and put a signal box over the top of that, for example, so that you get a really prototypical operation of the rodding to the point.
Sky's the limit, really, isn't it?
It really is.
So in terms of the stools here, what's the sort of recommended distance between each of the stools?
That would vary upon the prototype that you're modelling. So the key advice we have to give is check before you put the stools in, because different railway companies have different spacings, and even in different locations the same railway company would have different spacing as well.
If only there was a way to accurately measure in 4mm scale the distances I need.
Well, you say that, but we do of course have our 4mm scale ruler.
Oh, brilliant. Well, there it is.
So we have that there. This is a fantastic little bit of kit, as you can see. So you can see everything on there in 4mm scale ready to use.
So this is a stainless rule. It won't corrode. But the big question I've got to have is I can see you've got all of these little pre-drilled holes in here. I guess that's something for bending wire or perhaps even bending point rodding?
You can use it to, the actual tool is designed to bend handrails. So they are pre-sized, so you can make a 4-foot or a 2'3" handrail.
That's really handy.
So you can actually bend that correctly, and it's very precise. We will be sending out a newsletter, so people may have seen that. But the other thing we can use that for is bending the point rodding, or we can use it for bending the fine wire and tube system or the distance mount pack. So any bit of wire can be bent with it as well. So it's yes, it's a scale ruler, but it's also a wire bender as well.
Very, very neat product indeed. So look out for that at your local DCCconcepts retailer and stockist. Now, tell us about these two systems here. So we've talked about the point rodding solution and system, but what we haven't really touched on is the motor that you've got there powering it. So this comes here, this is a DC and DCC powered point motor.
That's right.
Tell us about the package here that we can see in front.
Okay, so this is the control board that will drive the point motors. It's got 2 channels on there, so it can control 2 different turnouts. If you have, for example, a crossover or a turnout loop where you have 2 points operating at the same time, there is a splitter board in here as well, so you can use one channel to change both points at the same time. And then we do a crossover pack of just the motors, so you can change up to 4 points on one
if you
board.
have 2 crossovers,
Right.
okay.
This is a really good point motor because this is both digital and analog. So you can either feed it with a DCC signal and give it an address in the same way as you would with any of our Cobalt point motors with a simple set and run switch, very straightforward. Or you can give it DC power and change that with just a toggle switch or a push button, anything that closes left to centre or centre to right, and it will change the point motor as well. This is suitable for most gauges because the throw that the point motor has is adjustable.
Right.
And you can change anything from roughly 1 to 2mm all the way up to about 11 to 12mm. So we've tested this on end gauge points with no problem whatsoever, but equally we've gone all the way up to gauge 1 and it operates perfectly.
Wow.
So it's a really, really versatile point motor.
So you've got, as you can see, you've got the cosmetic point motors here in 2, 4 and 7mm scales.
That's correct. We give a taster. We do sell these as a separate item. They're very cost effective and very precisely modelled as well. And that's, as you say, available in 2, 4 and 7mm. And then these are just the Westinghouse EP point motors.
Right. Yeah. So we've tested the system. We've seen it works on his demonstration plank, but I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into this on our project layout. So join us in a second because that's what we're going to be getting up to. Richard, a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Howard.
So thanks to Richard there, I've got a really good idea as to how I can use this new system from DCCconcepts on our project layout, The Art of Compromise. Now I've got a rough idea as to where I need to locate the point rodding, but there's nothing quite like reading up on this, which is something that's really quite niche. I'm no expert by any means on point rodding. I've never really done any signalling in my life, and as I suspect many of you watching this, you're probably scratching your heads thinking, well, where do I put my point rodding and where would it be located as per the prototype on my model railway? Well, thankfully the 2mm Scale Association can help you out on that front with this new little booklet called Point Rodding. And as you'd expect, inside we've got a whole load of different ideas from the various companies, but also some really nice diagrams there on well, where these things were located, how they operated and what you'd need if you were to model this on a layout, which is what we're doing, where these things will be located. So it covers things like compensating cranks, it covers facing point locks, it covers what happens in a station scenario, it covers things like large complicated junctions, it covers things like what happens outside of a signal box when you've got so many different rods all in a compact environment. And look there, for instance, we've got really nice diagrams which illustrate on a complex track plan, if you were to do something like that, where the rods would be located. So, in essence, if you're having a go at point rodding, pick yourself up one of these copies. It's useful. With that in mind, I think what's going to happen with our layout here is that because we've got a baseboard break, and this is something that DCCconcepts admit openly, is that you won't be able to transmit the power from one baseboard to another unless you come up with a solution yourself. There's nothing inside the kit which allows you to join one piece of point rodding to the next on the baseboard. So here's my plan. These 2 points, because we've got 4 points on the layout, these 2 points will have the point rodding operated from the point motor, and it will come back to here. But beyond here, we won't really see much moving. We'll model the point rodding, but we won't actually see it move. These 2 points here, of course, we can model the point rodding, and that'll go back to the little signal box. And that's okay, we can have all of that working with the cranks. But to be honest, behind the signal box there, we're not going to see the point cranks anyway. So there are limitations as to what we can actually do with this layout in the compact space available. And bear in mind that because these are designed for 00 gauge points, they're a little bit overscale, and behind that point, behind the signal box, is a little bit compact. So let's get started. For the purposes of this DVD, I'm only going to demonstrate on one point, which is this one here, and I think we're just going to make its way across here and down the side of the layout. So let's get started first by installing some little plank boards to install our cranks on. So I'm going to install the cranks on some sleepers. This is just being cut from some of DCCconcepts track, and in order to install the rodding from one side of the rail to the other, I'm just taking out some of the excess ballast there. I find a screwdriver works quite well for digging it all out, and where there's some plastic on the sleepers there, you've just got to be careful. So just bending some of the point rodding there into place to place it underneath the track. We'll hook it into the other side onto the point, and we'll cut it to length with a pair of shears. Now the next stage is to mark out where we're going to install the crank itself, and for this purpose I've got to dig out all of the scenery. Of course, we're retrofitting this to a layout which has already had scenery fitted, so if you're doing this sort of thing, I recommend you do the point rodding long before the scenery. Just hoover out the excess there, and then we can start applying some very thick super glue and place the 2 short offcuts of sleeper into place. So just push them into place with a screwdriver there. Now this isn't going to be the definitive position, because we will go ahead and fit this with some little brass pins through these 4 holes that you can see on the side, but it doesn't fit quite square. As you can see, it's raised up and there's a little rivet to the underside just there. So what we need to do is get a little pin vise with a drill bit, and we'll just go into the centre of the sleeper there and just drill out a tiny little section just to be able to fit the rivet in underneath. Quick test fit reveals that it's okay. So we've got a smaller drill bit now in the pin vise, and I'm just going to drill out the 4 corners of the crank, and then we'll go ahead and tap some little pins into place. So this is the fiddly stage of the installation of the crank. You've got to be careful and just hit the pins into place there without damaging any of the brass of the pin itself. So next we can start installing the rod into place, and just thread them through carefully with a pair of tweezers. So the next stage is to install the rod rollers. Now you'll note that the baseboard scenery has been removed. I'm installing these with a pair of tweezers and some thick super glue, and just trying to line them up by eye. But to help them in the correct distance, I'm using the rule from DCCconcepts. This is graduated with foot intervals for 4mm to the foot scale, which makes the process of getting these aligned at say between 8 and 9 foot intervals absolutely spot on. And once you're happy with the alignment of the rollers, you can then install the rodding. This is made easy with a pair of tweezers, and once you get to the crank at the end there, just align it up and crimp it with a pair of pliers into place. So the next stage is to install another rod. This is going to control the point at the far end of the layout, which will run parallel to the rodding on this point. And once we're happy, we'll just continue the same process around the layout. So as you can see, I've added these stools at 9-foot intervals. If it's on a curve, you can reduce that to about 5.5 feet. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the system. It's easy to use, versatile, and it took me about half a day to do this. So as you can understand, I'm not going to do the entire layout for this DVD, simply isn't time at the moment. However, if you want to see it complete, then please pay a visit to either of our 2 shows in early 2019. Either the Festival of British Railway Modelling at Doncaster Racecourse on February 9th and 10th. Alternatively, perhaps you're further south, you can visit us at the London Festival of Railway Modelling at Alexandra Palace on March 23rd and 24th. We'll see you there with this project layout. Come and visit the stand and say hello.
Most of us tend to think of telephone boxes as being red things, a bit like this one up here. Now this is the classic British kiosk number 6, introduced in 1935 for the Silver Jubilee of King George V, and therefore nicknamed the Jubilee kiosk. Designed by the famous architect Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, it lasted for a very long while and was obviously a big part of the steam era layout. But moving forward, and I say forward, I mean it's not that much further forward nowadays, in 1980 British Telecom was born, and British Telecom came along and they said, we want something modern and thrusting and new and not made of cast iron. So they introduced the KX series, the KX 100 being the most popular kiosk in 1985, designed by David Carter Associates, and these gradually replaced the red telephone boxes in many bits of Britain. Now, they're a classic thing, very much part of the scene. And so, if you're building a layout set in the 1980s, then you need to start thinking about a different type of telephone box. And that's what we're going to build today. There's only one method of building them that's really going to work in 4mm scale, and that is to use an etched brass kit. You're going to need metal work because you've got very, very thin bars and everything, and an awful lot of glazing. The kit I'm using is from Shire Scenes, and it's their S25 K100 telephone box kit. Now, it's a great kit for a beginner because, like a lot of the Shire Scenes kits, it is designed to be assembled with super glue. There you can see the main components of the kit quite nicely. We've got the main body of the telephone box, the inner bits, and a roof. They're all nicely laid out and they're all labelled on the sheet as well. You've got the inside bits and they go inside the telephone box, and there's letters on the etch as well to make life even easier. So the first thing we're going to need to do is cut the bits out from the etch. Now it's quite important, don't take bits off the etch until you need them. There are actually 2 telephone handsets included on this, so you can lose one, but all the others you're going to have to be a bit careful with. Removing bits from the etch is simple enough. You just need a reasonable size craft knife and cut through the little nibs that are holding it into the etched sheet. This is the main body, and you can just see there are little tabs left on the top there. These will need to be removed, and for larger tabs I tend to use a pair of cheap scissors. Alternatively, you can file the tabs off. Now always file along the etch. Don't file across. You'll actually make a dip into the etch. File along as far as possible and use the biggest file you can. I can't get that big file in there, so there's a little nib here. I'll just take that off with the needle file. Again, trying to work along the metal. Got my basic component. The next job is to fold it up. Now, the rule with etch kits is there will be what's called a half etched line on the inside of each part. I'm just bending the top edges of each piece over, and there you are, that's the top formed. And then we have to move on to making it into a box. Again, half etched lines, and in fact they're etched all the way through down most of the corners of the box, so that they will bend really, really easily. You could almost do this with your fingers, but it's much, much more sensible to do it with a flat pair of pliers. just so you support the metal as it's working. The box itself needs to be fixed together. Now you might think, oh, I'm going to have to do some break out a soldering iron, and indeed with many etch kits that is exactly what you've got to do. But these kits and many modern etch kits for small details are designed to go together with super glue. Two ways of using super glue. The first is to have a big bottle of the stuff, pour a little bit onto a bit of plastic and pick it up with a small screwdriver or a pin. To be honest, for this sort of job, I prefer the brushable type super glues. Just run a little bit in the joint and then hold the joint in position. It just sets with the moisture, and there you are. That's my basic telephone box. There's also a roof which I'll stick on top, and for more fun and games, of course, you've also got all the interior parts to build. And these work in exactly the same way as the box. Smaller pair of pliers to bend this. This is actually the all-important telephone bit of the telephone box. And there we are. We've formed the basic box. Essentially, you cut out all the bits, glue them into position. There are some telephone signs to fit in the top edge. To be honest, I leave those out because they were transparent in real life, and I'll show you a finished model in a minute. I did say that these kits don't need to be primed, and it's absolutely right. They generally don't need to be primed. They're actually coated with a bit of varnish, which makes them impossible to solder unless you clean the varnish off, but it does mean that paint sticks to them remarkably well. Except that telephone boxes are silver, and they're actually made of stainless steel. But the problem is that silver isn't a colour that covers very, very well. So I've tried a couple of options. I very much like, for most metallic finishes, I rather like the Molten Metals range, which comes from airbrushes.com. That's an acrylic paint, works very, very nicely. But I actually, for telephone box work, prefer a pot of Humbrol aluminium colour, because it just seems to have the slight edge on covering. You might wonder why I'm painting a stainless steel telephone box aluminium. It's quite simply, it is because of the colour. The post office did try aluminium telephone boxes. The K7 or kiosk number 7 was built in aluminium, left outside for 3 months, and apparently the mess that it ended up in the British weather was appalling. So they decided after that they'd make the K8 in cast iron again. But by the 80s we moved on and we were using stainless steel. And the main problem with all metallic paints is that the particles are actually quite large, and that means you have to keep stirring the paint because the particles will drop out of the carrier and just sit in the bottom. By spraying my telephone box with grey primer, it gives me a really, really nice base colour to work with, so the silver paint doesn't have to do very much to cover the colour underneath. The design of the telephone box is such that most of the bars are aluminium colour, so I'm just going to whack a coat of aluminium over this, and I'll do the inside of the box as well. I'll leave it for at least 24 hours to dry. Here we have it. I've painted my telephone box. They're not desperately sophisticated colours telephone boxes. You've got a mostly silver, black edging around the inside of around the edges of the glass, just inside the bars where the plastic coated bits were to hold the glass. Yellow bar across the centre of the door. Now these varied. Yellow bars were initially introduced. They were the very first ones. Phone card boxes were green, and then in 1991, they changed the logo, so the British Telecom logo that's actually etched into the kit disappeared and was replaced with the Piper logo. Okay, the last job is to glaze the telephone box, and for this I am using some glazing that I picked up out of some plastic packing. I've cut it so it just slides inside the telephone box. Make sure it's a nice, good sliding fit before you do anything, because you've got to fit 3 of these. Then all we've got to do is stick it in place. Don't use super glue on clear plastic. The reason is I mentioned that super glue sets by working with the moisture, and that means that anywhere you've touched this plastic where you will have left a little bit of grease or a little bit of moisture from your fingers, the super glue will be attracted to that, sit on it and dry. The correct stuff to use for gluing in plastic is canopy glue. Now, canopy glue is something from the plastic kit model aircraft world. It's actually a sort of PVA, I think. The important thing is it's not attracted to moisture in the same way super glue is. It will stick most things, and the important thing is it dries really, really clear. Stick a little bit on the corner of your modelling board, and I just like to dip the edges of the plastic. I'm not going to go mad and try and cover the whole thing. This is the fiddly bit. Drop it into the telephone box with the tweezers, push it against where it's supposed to be stuck, holding it with the back of the tweezers, just rub my finger along the areas where any glue's showing. But this then left upside down will set, and that's essentially it. Little bit of tidying up, stick a bit more plastic in, and as they say in all the best kids TV shows, here's one I did earlier. I've actually not used the X logos this time. I managed to find a pack of, I think it's Fox Transfers, did some water slide transfers for the logos, which I thought just looked a little bit better than the X Telecom logos. But there you have it, one little scene with a modern KX100 telephone box in. Ideal, and doesn't that just say 1985?
I hope you found this episode of BRM TV enjoyable. Don't miss one of Phil Parker's recent finds from a trip to the Severn Valley Railway in the Extras menu, and let us know what you like the most about BRM TV. Email us at brm@warnersgroup.co.uk, and until next time, happy modelling.
It's amazing if you go behind the scenes at any preserved railway or museum, just what's tucked away that isn't on general show to the public. And this has got to be one of the more interesting things I've seen. Dave, can you explain what it is?
Well, in actual fact, it's a Buckeye coupling, which is the sort of coupling that they use on the coaching stock today. Now, when the Mark I coach was produced, of course, it was used an awful lot with the screw link couplings. So naturally, you've got to be able to attach a screw link coupling coach to one with a Buckeye.
Yes, and you can't just use a bit of.
You couldn't do this.
No, you can't use a bit of chain or something.
No.
There's nowhere to attach it to.
So they had these Buckeyes which would drop down, and by taking the weight off, taking this pin out, the whole thing drops down. Pin goes back in, and the hook then can be just used for an ordinary screw coupling.
Oh, I see. So if I slide that over,
pull that lever there, that's for releasing it. You pull that pin out.
I pull that pin out now, take the weight off it and drop it down. There we have a standard screw coupling, so you can connect the two.
That's right.
And that was presumably for connecting it to locos.
Well, the locomotive always uses the hook.
Yeah.
With the exception of the A4, when they use the corridor tender, all locomotives use the screw coupling. So the end of the train had to have a hook on like this, but for fastening two together, for fastening a Buckeye stock to an ordinary screw couplet stock, you couldn't use the Buckeye, so hence it drops down out of the way. But if we have two Buckeyes we want to fasten together, we take the pin out, lift the Buckeye up, pin goes back in again, and the pin uses the hook.
That's ingenious.
So the pull is always on the hook. Having put the pin back in, it drops down.
There's a little catch on the other side that just holds it.
On the coach itself, there is a chain that fastens to this. That opens the jaws.
Right.
The jaws open, and then of course the coaches are then just brought together like that.
With quite a chunk.
Quite a jolt.
Yeah, now this is interesting because of course traditionally British stock used screw or 3-link couplings, and the Continentals and Americans used Buckeyes, but they're such a practical proposition when working with coaching stock. Obviously,
absolutely. I used to be a guard here, and I would far rather shunt with Buckeye stock than with the old screw coupling.
Amazing. And I mean this on its own is a fascinating thing, because presumably it's a training aid for people.
Yes, it is. I'm assuming, I don't know, this came to the Severn Valley in a coach that we'd bought, and I think it must have been put in at one of the railway workshops by someone who saw this was probably going for scrap, so they put it in hoping that someone would be able to make use of it, and we certainly did do that.
Oh yeah, it's great training aid presumably for people working on the Severn Valley Railway, right. Because they've got to understand this in the same way.
And you see, the thing is that I release the jaws like that. Instead of having to lift over 100 weight of cast iron, I can lift it with my little finger. Great,
and so you can do it in the warm with several people quite easily. Well, thank you very much. It is it's an amazing item with a history all of its own that it would be lovely to know more of. But so useful to be able to get an understanding of how the Buckeye works, how it drops down, and how the various coupling systems work. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.